Ambassador Sarah straightened her shoulders as she walked through the crystalline corridors of the Galactic Senate building on Nexus Prime. The massive structure stretched into the clouds above, its walls shimmering with embedded quantum displays, showing real-time data from thousands of worlds across the galaxy. Each step echoed with a hollow ring that reminded her how alone humanity stood in this vast political arena. 3 months had passed since Earth received its controversial admission to the Galactic Senate. The decision had sparked outrage among the older species who viewed humans as primitive newcomers barely worthy of acknowledgement, let alone representation in the galaxy's most powerful governing body. Though with their proud military tradition, the merchant princes who controlled interstellar trade routes, and the ancient ethereals who claimed to have achieved enlightenment before most species had discovered fire, all had voted against Earth's membership. Sarah's communicator buzzed with an urgent message from her aide. Ambassador, the emergency session has been called. The hegemony forces have broken through the outer rim defenses. They're requesting immediate military intervention from all member species. The hegemony. Sarah had read the classified reports about the machine intelligence that had emerged from the dark reaches of unexplored space 6 months ago. Unlike the organic species that made up the Galactic Senate, the hegemony showed no interest in diplomacy, trade, or coexistence. Their massive fleets consumed entire star systems, converting organic matter and mineral resources into more ships, more weapons, more death. As Sarah entered the Senate chamber, she could feel the weight of 1,000 alien gazes upon her. The circular amphitheater contained representatives from over 200 species, each sitting in environmental pods designed to accommodate their unique biological needs. The aquatic drift floated in spheres of pressurized water, while the silicon-based dwelled in chambers filled with superheated gas. In the center of it all, Chancellor of the Empire stood at the speaking podium, his forearms gesturing dramatically as his translator rendered his words into standard galactic. The situation grows more desperate by the hour, announced, his voice carrying the authority of a species that had dominated space warfare for. Our combined fleets have engaged the hegemony forces at 17 different fronts. We have lost 43% of our ships and 78% of our experienced commanders. The enemy adapts to our tactics faster than we can develop new ones. A ripple of fear passed through the chamber. They were legendary for their military prowess. If their fleets were struggling against the hegemony, what hope did the rest of the galaxy have? Senator Ara of the Trade Federation rose from her gilded pod, her 3 eyes blinking in sequence as she spoke. My people have offered significant financial incentives for any species willing to contribute additional forces. We've already lost 17 major trading hubs to these machines. Our economic models project complete systemic collapse within 8 months if the hegemony advance continues unchecked. Sarah listened as representative after representative stood to detail their species' contributions and losses. The pattern became clear quickly. Everyone was giving everything they had, and it still wasn't enough. The hegemony's ability to analyze and counter any strategy within hours of first contact had turned what should have been overwhelming galactic superiority into a grinding war of attrition that the organic species were losing. When Chancellor's gaze fell upon the human section, Sarah could see the mixture of desperation and disdain in his eyes. We have heard from all major military powers, he said, his tone making it clear that Earth was not included in that category. Perhaps our member has some insight to offer. The chamber fell silent as Sarah stood and activated her pod speaking system. She had prepared for this moment, but the reality of addressing the most powerful beings in the galaxy while her species' reputation hung in the balance felt overwhelming. Every word she spoke would be analyzed, recorded, and remembered. Honored representatives, she began, her voice steady despite the circumstances. Earth acknowledges the severity of this crisis. However, before we can meaningfully contribute to any military solution, we need complete tactical data on the hegemony's capabilities and all previous engagement records. A sound that might have been laughter came from the ethereal delegations section. Elder's psychic voice resonated in the minds of everyone present. The humans wish to study while systems burn. How predictably primitive. Sarah felt her jaw clench, but she maintained her diplomatic composure. With respect, Elder, understanding our enemy is the first step toward defeating them. Earth requests access to all available intelligence on hegemony ship designs, tactical patterns, communication methods, and resource allocation strategies. Chancellor's expression shifted from disdain to something approaching curiosity. You believe you can find weaknesses that have eluded our greatest military minds. I believe, Sarah replied carefully, that fresh perspectives sometimes reveal solutions that experience overlooks. Humans have a saying, when you're lost in a maze, sometimes the best way out is to stop and look at it from a different angle. The representative, General, spoke through his environmental chamber's translation system. The hegemony has demonstrated adaptation speeds that exceed our tactical evolution by orders of magnitude. What makes you think human analysis will prove any more effective than our combined intelligence efforts? Sarah had anticipated this question. The truth was that she wasn't entirely sure Earth could offer anything the other species hadn't already tried. But she had studied enough human military history to know that her species had a peculiar talent for finding unconventional solutions when conventional ones failed. General, how long does it typically take your species to develop a new battle strategy? The silicon-based being paused for a moment. Our strategic councils can formulate comprehensive tactical adjustments within 3 to 5 standard cycles, depending on the complexity of the situation. Sarah nodded and turned to address the chamber as a whole. The average human military commander can develop, test, and implement a completely new tactical approach in a matter of hours. We don't have the luxury of extensive deliberation that longer-lived species enjoy. When humans face extinction, we adapt or we die, usually quickly. Crude improvisation is hardly equivalent to strategic sophistication, Elder projected dismissively. The hegemony's adaptation speed renders such hasty planning obsolete. Perhaps, Sarah conceded, but human military doctrine doesn't rely solely on strategic planning. We've learned to embrace chaos, to turn unpredictability into an advantage. If the hegemony can adapt to any consistent tactical approach, then the solution might be to never use the same approach twice. Chancellor leaned forward, his 4 hands gripping the podium's edge. You're suggesting deliberately random tactics. Not random, Sarah corrected. Asymmetric. Humans have spent most of their history fighting opponents who were stronger, better equipped, or more numerous. We've learned that when you can't match your enemy's strengths, you force them to fight on ground where their advantages become irrelevant. The chamber buzzed with translator static as hundreds of species processed this concept simultaneously. Sarah could see some representatives exchanging glances. Whether of interest or skepticism, she couldn't tell. Senator Ara spoke again, her voice carrying a note of genuine curiosity. What specific capabilities could Earth contribute to such an approach? This was the moment Sarah had been preparing for since Earth's admission to the Senate. She activated her personal data pad and transmitted a compressed file to the chamber's central display system. Technical specifications, ship designs, and tactical doctrines appeared in holographic detail above the speaking floor. Earth may be new to galactic politics, she said, but we've been preparing for interstellar conflict since before we achieved faster-than-light travel. Our military planners have always operated under the assumption that we would eventually face technologically superior opponents. The displayed data showed human ship designs that looked primitive compared to the sleek vessels favored by most galactic species. Earth's warships were angular, heavily armored, and bristling with redundant systems. They looked more like flying fortresses than the elegant works of art that the Ethereals preferred. Our vessels are built for damage absorption rather than damage avoidance, Sarah explained. Human commanders expect to take heavy casualties and continue fighting. We design our ships to function even after losing 70% of their systems. General's voice carried a note of professional interest. Impressive resilience parameters, but the hegemony's firepower levels would overwhelm even such robust designs. Which is why human tactics don't rely on ship-to-ship superiority, Sarah continued. We've developed extensive protocols for boarding actions, sabotage operations, and what we call technological warfare, turning enemy systems against themselves. She highlighted another section of the data, showing training records for human special forces units. The casualty rates during training exercises were so high that several species representatives recoiled from their display screens. Your soldiers trained to an acceptable mortality rate of 12%, Chancellor asked in disbelief. Elite units train harder, Sarah replied matter-of-factly. Human special forces operate under the principle that if training doesn't prepare you for the worst possible scenarios, combat will kill you. We prepare our best soldiers to function effectively even when everything goes wrong. Elder's psychic voice carried a note of genuine shock. Such brutal conditioning seems unnecessarily harsh for a species that claims to value individual life. We do value individual life, Sarah said firmly. That's exactly why we train so hard. Every soldier who dies because of inadequate preparation is a life we failed to protect through our negligence. Humans would rather endure harsh training than bury friends who died because we weren't ready. The chamber fell into contemplative silence as the implications of Earth's military philosophy sank in. These weren't the desperate boasts of a species trying to prove its worth. They were the calculated preparations of a civilization that had always expected to fight for its survival against overwhelming odds. Chancellor finally spoke, his voice carrying more respect than Sarah had heard from him before. Ambassador, Earth's tactical proposals are unconventional. However, given our current situation, unconventional approaches may be exactly what we need. How quickly could your forces be deployed to active combat zones? Sarah had been hopping for this question. Earth's expeditionary fleets are already en route to strategic positions throughout the galaxy. We began deployment the moment we received Senate membership, anticipating that our first major contribution would need to be immediate and decisive. You moved military assets without Senate authorization. Senator Ara's voice carried a note of alarm. We moved defensive assets to protect member worlds that requested assistance, Sarah clarified. Earth takes its Senate obligations seriously. When the hegemony crisis began, we considered it our duty to be prepared to help however possible. The truth was more complex than Sarah was letting on. Earth's government had indeed positioned fleets throughout the galaxy, but not entirely for altruistic reasons. Human military planners had recognized that their species' survival in the galactic community would depend on proving their worth quickly and decisively. The hegemony crisis had provided exactly the opportunity they needed. Chancellor exchanged glances with several other senior representatives before speaking again. Very well, Ambassador. Earth will be granted access to all available hegemony intelligence data. Your tactical analysts will have 48 hours to propose specific operational plans. Thank you, Chancellor, Sarah replied. Earth won't disappoint the Senate's trust. As the session adjourned and representatives began filing out of the chamber, Sarah remained in her pod, watching the massive display screens that showed the current tactical situation across the galaxy. Red markers indicated hegemony positions, blue showed allied forces, and yellow marked contested systems where the outcome remained uncertain. There was so much red on the map. Her communicator buzzed with an encrypted message from Admiral aboard the Earth flagship Defiant, currently positioned 3 systems away from the nearest hegemony front. Sarah, I hope you know what you're doing down there. The fleet's ready, but what you're promising? It's going to take everything we have and probably more. Sarah typed back quickly. David, everything we've worked for comes down to the next few days. Earth either proves it belongs at this table or we become a footnote in galactic history. No pressure. The response came back almost immediately. Understood, Defiant out. As Sarah finally rose from her pod and began the long walk back to the human embassy, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had just committed her entire species to a gamble with stakes they couldn't afford to lose. The other Senate members had seen Earth's data, heard their proposals, and remained skeptical but willing to let humans try. Now came the hard part, making good on promises that everyone expected them to fail to keep. The corridor lights dimmed automatically as Sarah passed, sensors detecting her movement and adjusting illumination to human preferences. It was a small courtesy that reminded her how much the Galactic Senate had invested in making member species feel welcome. The question that kept her awake most nights was whether humanity would prove worthy of such investment. Tomorrow would begin 48 hours that would determine not just Earth's place in the galactic community, but potentially the survival of organic life itself. Sarah had never felt the weight of her species' future so heavily on her shoulders. She paused at a viewing port that looked out over Nexus Prime's sprawling cityscape, watching the lights of 1,000 different civilizations twinkling in the alien dusk. Somewhere among those lights were the greatest military minds in galactic history. all struggling with the same impossible problem that now rested partially. Admiral David stood in the command center of the Defiant, studying the holographic displays that now showed more information about the hegemony than any human had ever seen before. The Senate's intelligence files contained tactical data spanning 6 months of increasingly desperate battles, and every piece of information confirmed his worst fears about what Earth was up against. The hegemony ships were larger than anything in the human fleet, their hulls composed of self-repairing nanomaterial that could rebuild damaged sections faster than most weapons could destroy them. Their energy weapons operated on principles that pushed the boundaries of known physics, and their tactical coordination suggested a collective intelligence that processed information at superhuman speeds. "Admiral," called Lieutenant Commander Sarah Park from the analysis station, "we've finished processing the engagement records. The pattern is consistent across all 17 major battles. The hegemony observes enemy tactics for approximately 47 minutes, then implements perfect countermeasures that reduce Allied effectiveness by an average of 78%. Nodded grimly. He had been expecting something like this, but seeing the numbers laid out so starkly was still sobering. What about adaptation to new tactics? Even worse, sir. When they introduced their quantum phase disruption weapons at the Battle of Gate, the hegemony required only 23 minutes to develop effective countermeasures. By the time the ethereals deployed their psychic warfare protocols, enemy adaptation time had dropped to 18 minutes. Dr. Earth's chief specialist looked up from her own console. "Admiral, I've been analyzing the hegemony ship designs, and there's something the other species might have missed. These ships aren't just tactically adaptive, they're evolutionarily adaptive." "Explain." "Every engagement record shows subtle modifications to hegemony ship designs," Doctor continued, highlighting specific sections of the enemy vessels on the main display. "New weapon configurations, altered hull geometries, improved shield matrices. They're not just learning to counter specific tactics, they're physically evolving their technology in real time." Commander Wei, no relation to the ambassador despite sharing a surname, spoke from the tactical station. "That explains why repeated attacks become less effective even when the enemy hasn't had time to adapt. They're literally becoming immune to weapons that damage them." Felt a familiar tightness in his chest that came with understanding just how desperate their situation was. Earth's military had prepared for fighting technologically superior enemies, but they had always assumed that superior technology followed predictable rules. The hegemony seemed to be rewriting those rules with every battle. "Sir," called Ensign Martinez from communications, "we're receiving a priority transmission from Admiral's fleet at the Arcturus front." "Put it through." The holographic display shimmered and resolved into the image of Admiral, her uniform scorched and her face grim. Behind her, could see emergency lighting and crew members rushing between damaged stations. "David, the situation here is worse than the reports suggested. We lost the heavy cruiser Montreal 2 hours ago, and the hegemony forces are pushing toward the Arcturus colony. They've got 17 million civilians down there, and our current defensive line won't hold more than another 6 hours." Exchanged glances with his senior staff. Admiral was one of Earth's most experienced commanders, and if she was calling for help, the situation was critical. "What's your tactical assessment?" "Conventional engagement is suicide," she replied bluntly. "The enemy adapts faster than we can modify our approach. Every minute we stay in direct combat, they get better at killing us. We need a completely different strategy, or we need to start planning evacuation routes." Doctor leaned forward. "Admiral, have you tried completely random tactical patterns, not adaptive strategies, literally random actions?" Admiral's expression shifted to something between confusion and irritation. "Doctor, random tactics get people killed. There's a reason military doctrine exists." "But what if predictability is what's getting people killed?" Doctor pressed. "The hegemony's adaptation speed suggests they're running probability calculations on enemy behavior. If we could eliminate predictable patterns entirely." Felt something click in his mind. How long until the hegemony reaches optimal firing range on the colony? 5 hours, 47 minutes at current approach speed. "Hold your position and minimize engagement," ordered. "We're coming to you, but we're going to try something that's either brilliant or completely insane." "David, what are you planning?" looked around his command center at the faces of officers who had trained their entire careers for this moment. We're going to test a hypothesis that could either save the galaxy or get us all killed. Probably both. The transmission ended and turned to address his senior staff. Ladies and everything we've learned about the hegemony suggests they operate like the galaxy's most advanced chess computer. They analyze patterns, predict outcomes, and develop optimal responses. But what happens when your opponent stops playing chess? Commander Wei raised an eyebrow. Sir, are you suggesting we abandon military doctrine entirely? I'm suggesting we remember that human military doctrine was developed for fighting other humans, replied. When you're facing an enemy that thinks faster than you do, thinking becomes a liability. Sometimes the best strategy is to stop thinking and start reacting. Lieutenant Commander Park pulled up Earth's training records on the main display. Admiral, our Marines have extensive experience with what we call chaos protocols, tactical approaches designed for situations where normal command structure has broken down and units have to operate with maximum autonomy. Nodded, exactly. The hegemony has faced disciplined military forces following predictable doctrines. They've never faced what humans look like when we stop following rules and start improvising. Doctor was already pulling up technical specifications for Earth ships. Admiral, if we're going to deliberately embrace unpredictability, we should consider modifying our weapons systems for maximum tactical variance. Instead of optimizing for consistency, we optimize for chaos. What kind of modifications? Random firing patterns, variable weapon yields, deliberately inconsistent shield frequencies. We make it impossible for the enemy to predict what we're going to do because we don't know what we're going to do. Commander Wei looked skeptical. Doctor, that sounds like a recipe for friendly fire incidents and tactical disasters. Maybe, Doctor admitted, but tactical disasters are predictable. The hegemony can plan for tactical disasters. What they can't plan for is tactical improvisation that doesn't follow any logical pattern. Made his decision. We have 5 hours to reach Admiral's position. I want every department to develop protocols for maximum unpredictability. Engineering, I want you to rig our weapons for random output variance. Tactical, I want firing solutions that change every 10 seconds regardless of effectiveness. Navigation, plot a course to Arcturus that violates every principle of efficient space travel. The crew exchanged glances, but could see understanding dawning in their expressions. They were about to attempt something no military force in galactic history had ever tried, deliberately embracing chaos as a tactical advantage. Sir, called Ensign Martinez, we're receiving another transmission. This one's from Ambassador on Nexus Prime. Sarah's image appeared on the display, her expression tense. Admiral, I've just finished briefing the Senate on Earth's tactical proposals. There. Skeptical, to put it mildly. Chancellor has given us 48 hours to demonstrate results, or Earth's military participation will be relegated to support roles. Felt the familiar weight of command pressure settling on his shoulders. Understood, Ambassador. How much support can we expect from the other fleets? That's complicated, Sarah replied. They are willing to coordinate with human forces, but they want to maintain their traditional tactical approaches. They are more interested in protecting their trade routes than engaging in risky experimental strategies. The ethereals. Well, they think our entire approach is barbarically primitive. What about intelligence sharing? Full access to everything they have. The hegemony's technical specifications, tactical analysis, communication intercepts. It's all at your disposal. The question is whether Earth can use that information more effectively than species with thousands of years of military experience. Looked at the tactical displays showing the hegemony's advance across dozens of star systems. Red markers were spreading like an infection across the galaxy map, consuming everything in their path. Sarah, we're about to find out if human chaos can beat machine perfection. Either we prove that Earth deserves its Senate seat, or we provide the galaxy with a very expensive object lesson. David, Sarah's voice carried a note of personal concern beneath the diplomatic formality. Be careful out there. Earth can't afford to lose its best military minds in the first major engagement. Don't worry about us, replied with more confidence than he felt. Worry about explaining to the Senate why humans decided to throw out the Galactic Warfare Handbook and write our own. As the transmission ended, turned to find his entire bridge crew looking at him with expressions that mixed anticipation with barely controlled terror. They all understood what they were about to attempt, and they all knew that failure would mean more than just military defeat. It would mean Earth's exclusion from the galactic community just when humanity most needed allies. "All right, people," announced. "We have 5 hours to reach the Arcturus system and prove that human unpredictability can beat hegemony adaptation. Lieutenant Commander Park, I want every chaos protocol we've ever developed loaded into the tactical computers. Doctor, begin modifications to all weapon systems. I want maximum variance in everything from beam frequency to missile guidance." "Sir," Commander Wei called out, "the other human fleets are requesting orders. Admiral Harrison at Wolf 359, Admiral at the Vega colonies, Admiral Jackson defending the trade routes. They're all asking whether they should implement similar tactics." Consider this for a moment. If Earth's chaos strategy failed, spreading it across all human forces would turn a limited defeat into a species-wide catastrophe. But if it worked? "Tell them to prepare chaos protocols but wait for our signal," he decided. "We test the theory at Arcturus first. If it works, we roll it out galaxy-wide. If it doesn't work..." He left the sentence unfinished. Doctor looked up from her modifications console. "Admiral, I've been thinking about the hegemony's adaptation patterns. They seem to require direct observation of tactics before they can develop countermeasures. What if we could create tactics that are invisible until the moment of implementation?" "Explain." "Stealth approaches, delayed activation weapons, prepositioned assets that only activate when specific conditions are met. We don't just embrace chaos. We embrace delayed chaos that the enemy can't observe until it's too late to adapt." Felt a grin spreading across his face. "Doctor, that's either the craziest idea I've heard today or the most brilliant, probably both. How long would you need to set up such systems?" "With the modifications we're already making, about 4 hours. We'd arrive at Arcturus with everything ready to implement." "Do it," turned to address the entire bridge crew. "Ladies, we're about to attempt something unprecedented in galactic military history. We're going to fight the most advanced enemy the galaxy has ever seen using tactics so chaotic that even we don't fully understand them. Questions?" Lieutenant Commander Park raised her hand. "Sir, what happens if our random tactics accidentally target friendly ships?" "We try not to do that," replied. "But if it happens, we adapt and keep fighting. The alternative is losing systematically instead of chaotically, and I'd rather lose while confusing the enemy than lose while following a playbook they've already figured out." Commander Wei spoke up next. "Admiral, what about casualty estimates for this approach?" Felt the weight of command settle heavily on his shoulders. This was the question he had been dreading because he honestly didn't know the answer. Human chaos protocols had been tested in simulations, but never against an enemy like the hegemony. "I don't know," he admitted. "Our casualty rates could be lower than conventional tactics if we can stay ahead of their adaptation curve, or they could be catastrophic if chaos proves less effective than discipline. What I do know is that every other species in the galaxy has tried conventional approaches, and they're all losing." The bridge fell silent as everyone processed this sobering reality. They were about to risk everything on an untested strategy because all the tested strategies had failed. "Sir," called Ensign Martinez, "we're receiving updated tactical data from the Arcturus front. Admiral reports that hegemony forces have begun deploying new weapon configurations she's never seen before." Pulled up the tactical display and felt his blood run cold. The hegemony ships were already adapting to expected human reinforcement tactics, modifying their approach patterns to counter conventional fleet movements. They were preparing for Earth's arrival before Earth had even decided how to arrive. "Helm, how long until we reach Arcturus?" 4 hours, 53 minutes at current speed, sir." Looked around his bridge one more time, taking in the faces of officers who were about to risk their lives on his judgment. "All right, people. Time to show the galaxy what humans look like when we stop trying to be civilized and start trying to survive. Let's go save some lives and confuse some machines." As the Defiant and its escort fleet jumped to hyperspace, couldn't Admiral watch the sensor readings with growing unease as unknown energy signatures approached the Arcturus system. Her fleet had been holding position for over 3 hours, taking only defensive actions while the hegemony forces methodically advanced toward the colony world below. Every instinct she had developed over 25 years of military service screamed at her to engage the enemy. But Admiral had been clear about waiting for his arrival. "Admiral," called Commander Torres from the sensor station, "the hegemony fleet has adjusted course again. They're moving to intercept whatever's coming through the hyperspace corridor." Nodded grimly. The enemy's ability to detect incoming ships before they dropped out of hyperspace was just another example of their technological superiority. "How long until Admiral arrives?" 17 minutes, ma'am, but the hegemony will be in optimal firing position on the colony in 12 minutes. We're running out of time. Studied the tactical display showing her battered fleet. 2 destroyers heavily damaged, 1 cruiser operating on backup power, and her flagship's main weapons at 60% capacity. They had been fighting a holding action for hours, taking casualties while trying to buy time for civilian evacuations. "Ma'am," called Lieutenant Sarah from communications, "we're getting reports from the surface. The last transport ship cleared the atmosphere 8 minutes ago. All civilians are evacuated." "Finally, some good news," muttered. At least if Earth's experimental tactics failed completely, 17 million people wouldn't die as a result. "Signal all ships to prepare for full defensive maneuvers. When Admiral arrives, we need to be ready to support whatever insane plan he's developed." The hyperspace corridor flared with brilliant light as ships began dropping back into normal space. But instead of the orderly formation had expected, the arriving Earth fleet appeared in what looked like complete chaos. Ships emerged at random intervals, scattered across dozens of different vectors, with no apparent coordination or tactical purpose. "What the hell is doing?" wondered aloud. Commander Torres was frantically trying to make sense of the sensor readings. "Admiral, I'm showing 43 Earth vessels, but they're not following any recognizable deployment pattern. Some are moving toward the hegemony fleet, others are heading for the outer system, and a few seem to be flying completely random courses." Opened a communication channel to the Defiant. "David, please tell me this chaos has some kind of purpose." Admiral's voice came through clearly, though could hear what sounded like controlled pandemonium in the background. "We're implementing tactical protocols designed to prevent enemy adaptation. Whatever you do, don't try to coordinate with our movements. The more unpredictable we are, the better this works." "David, unpredictable tactics don't win battles." "Maybe not," replied, "but predictable tactics have been losing them. Just watch our 6 and be ready to exploit any opportunities we create." Was about to respond when her tactical officer interrupted. "Admiral, the hegemony fleet is..." "Confused. They've stopped their advance and are repositioning to counter multiple perceived threats, but they can't seem to decide on optimal formations." On the main display, could see the machine fleet's previously perfect coordination beginning to break down. Individual ships were turning to engage different Earth vessels, but their movements lacked the synchronized precision that had made them so deadly in previous battles. "They're trying to calculate optimal responses to 43 different tactical approaches simultaneously," Commander Torres observed with amazement. "Their processing systems can't keep up with that many variables." Watched in fascination as the first Earthships engaged the enemy. Instead of the concentrated firepower she expected, human vessels were using seemingly random weapons combinations. Some fired full missile salvos followed by minimal beam weapons. Others alternated between maximum and minimum weapon yields in patterns that seemed deliberately inefficient. "Admiral," called Lieutenant, "I'm monitoring hegemony communications. Their coordination protocols are generating error messages. They're requesting tactical updates faster than their command systems can process them." One of the Earth destroyers, the USS Intrepid, suddenly broke from what appeared to be a retreat vector and launched a full spread of nuclear missiles at a hegemony cruiser. But instead of following standard targeting protocols, the missiles were programmed with completely random guidance patterns. Half missed their target entirely, but the other half struck at unexpected angles that bypassed the enemy's defensive systems. The hegemony cruiser's hull ruptured in 3 places, venting atmosphere and debris. Had seen hundreds of weapons impacts on hegemony ships, but this was the first time she had witnessed one taking significant damage. "How is that possible?" Commander Torres asked in amazement. "The enemy's defensive systems are optimized to counter logical attack patterns," realized. Random attack patterns don't follow logic, so the defenses can't predict impact points or adjust shield geometry. The battle was unlike anything had ever witnessed. Earth ships engaged and disengaged seemingly at random, with no apparent tactical coordination. Some vessels would suddenly accelerate toward enemy ships only to veer away at the last second. Others would fire weapons in directions that seemed to have no strategic value. But somehow it was working. The hegemony fleet, which had adapted perfectly to every conventional tactic thrown at them, was struggling to cope with tactics that made no conventional sense. Their ships were designed to counter optimal strategies, not deliberately suboptimal ones. "Admiral," called Commander Torres excitedly, "the hegemony advance has stopped completely. They're falling back to defensive formations, but they can't maintain formation integrity because they're receiving contradictory tactical updates." Opened communications to her fleet. "All ships begin harassment attacks on enemy vessels that are engaging Earth forces. Don't coordinate with the human fleet, just look for opportunities created by their activities." Her ships moved to support the chaotic Earth assault, and was amazed to see how effective conventional tactics became when the enemy was already confused by unconventional ones. Her cruisers' beam weapons found gaps in hegemony shields that should have been impenetrable, while her destroyers were able to target weapon systems that should have been protected. The USS Defiant suddenly appeared on sensors, moving directly toward the largest hegemony vessel in a pattern that looked like a suicidal charge. Was about to order support when the Earth flagship suddenly disappeared from all sensors. "Where did they go?" demanded. "Unknown, ma'am, they just vanished." 60 seconds later, the hegemony command ship erupted in a series of internal explosions. The massive vessel, which had seemed impervious to all conventional weapons, began breaking apart from the inside. "Admiral," called Lieutenant, "I'm detecting human life signs aboard the hegemony vessel. The Defiant didn't retreat. They used some kind of stealth technology to board the enemy ship." Felt her understanding of space warfare shift fundamentally. "David, what the hell did you just do?" His voice came through communications, though it sounded like he was shouting over the sound of combat. "Turns out hegemony ships have excellent external defenses but minimal internal security. When you can't win a fair fight, don't fight fair." The destruction of their command vessel sent ripples of confusion through the entire hegemony fleet. Without centralized coordination, individual ships began falling back on what appeared to be basic defensive protocols. But these protocols weren't designed to handle the chaotic mix of conventional and unconventional tactics they were facing. Watched in amazement as Earth ships continued their seemingly random assault patterns. Some vessels were now operating in small groups, but even their group tactics military logic. They would coordinate for brief periods, then suddenly break formation and begin operating independently again. "The enemy adaptation systems are overloading," Commander Torres reported. "They're generating so many contradictory tactical adjustments that their ship systems are beginning to malfunction." Realized that she was witnessing something unprecedented in galactic military history. The most advanced war machines ever created were being defeated not by superior technology or brilliant strategy, but by the deliberate abandonment of strategy altogether. "Admiral," called Lieutenant, "Admiral is requesting communication." Activated the channel immediately. "David, I don't know how you're doing this, but it's working. We need your fleet to begin conventional pursuit patterns on the retreating ships. The key to this working is keeping them confused by mixing predictable and unpredictable elements." "Understood. All ships begin standard pursuit formations. Target retreating vessels with conventional firing patterns." As fleet moved into familiar tactical roles, the hegemony retreat became a rout. Ships that might have withdrawn in good order under normal circumstances were fleeing in panic, their adaptation systems unable to process the conflicting tactical data they were receiving. "Admiral," called Commander Torres, "we're detecting massive system failures throughout the enemy fleet. Power fluctuations, navigation errors, weapons malfunctions. It's like their ships are having technological breakdowns." Opened a priority channel to Admiral. "David, are you seeing this? The enemy ships are falling apart." That's exactly what we hoped would happen. The hegemony's adaptation systems are designed to process tactical data and implement countermeasures. But when you give them too much contradictory data, they start implementing contradictory countermeasures. You mean their own adaptation systems are destroying them? Exactly. They're trying to optimize for dozens of different threat patterns simultaneously. It's like trying to solve 50 different equations at once. Eventually, the system crashes. Watched as another hegemony cruiser simply stopped responding to any external stimuli. Its engines shut down, weapons went offline, and the massive vessel began drifting helplessly through space. "Admiral," called Lieutenant, "we're receiving communications from the other battle fronts. The fleet at Wolf 359 is requesting tactical updates. They want to know if Earth's methods can be replicated." Looked at the tactical display showing the complete collapse of what had been an overwhelming enemy force just hours earlier. She had spent her entire career studying military doctrine, but nothing she had learned had prepared her for the effectiveness of abandoning doctrine entirely. His voice came through communications again. "We need to coordinate with the other human fleets immediately. The hegemony will adapt to our chaos tactics eventually, but if we can hit all their major fleets simultaneously while they're still confused." "David, are you suggesting we roll out these tactics across the entire galaxy?" "I'm suggesting we test whether human chaos can beat machine perfection on a galactic scale. We've got maybe 6 hours before the hegemony figures out countermeasures to unpredictability." Felt a mixture of excitement and terror at the implications. Earth was about to either save the galaxy or demonstrate on a massive scale why chaos should never be considered a legitimate military strategy. "All right, David, let's see if we can teach the rest of the galaxy how to stop making sense." As began transmitting tactical updates to Earth Command, she couldn't help but wonder what the Galactic Senate would think when they learned that humanity had solved their greatest military crisis by deliberately embracing confusion as a weapon. The hegemony might be the most advanced enemy the galaxy had ever faced, but they had never encountered an enemy that considered tactical incompetence to be a tactical advantage. Chancellor stood in the Galactic Senate's Emergency Command Center, watching real-time tactical displays from 17 different battle fronts across the galaxy. For the first time in 6 months, the red markers representing hegemony forces were retreating instead of advancing. The impossible was happening. The machine intelligence that had seemed unstoppable was not just being contained, but actively driven back. "Chancellor," called Director from the Strategic Analysis Station, "we're receiving battle reports from the Wolf 359 front. Admiral Harrison's Earth fleet has successfully routed a hegemony force that was 3 times larger than his own ships." His forearms moved in a gesture of amazement that his species reserved for witnessing the impossible. "How many ships did Admiral Harrison lose in the engagement?" 7% casualties, sir. The hegemony lost 63% of their fleet before full retreat." The numbers were so unprecedented that its first instinct was to question their accuracy. In every previous engagement with the hegemony, casualty ratios had heavily favored the machine forces. To see those numbers reversed so dramatically suggested either a fundamental error in reporting or a complete transformation of the tactical situation. "Director, confirm those numbers with independent sources." "Already done, Chancellor. The monitoring stations report identical figures. The observers embedded with the Earth fleet confirm the tactical assessment." Ambassador Sarah appeared on the main communication display, her image transmitted from the Senate diplomatic quarters. "Chancellor, Earth's fleets are requesting immediate tactical coordination with all allied forces. Admiral believes we have a limited window to implement galaxy-wide operations before the hegemony develops countermeasures to our approaches." Had spent most of his career dismissing human military capabilities as primitive and undisciplined. The idea that Earth's forces were now requesting to coordinate galactic military operations felt like a complete inversion of natural order. "Ambassador, what exactly are your forces proposing?" "Chancellor, Earth is prepared to share its tactical innovations with all allied species immediately. Our military analysts believe that coordinated implementation across all fronts could force a complete hegemony withdrawal from occupied systems within 72 hours. Elder's psychic voice resonated throughout the command center with notes of confusion and grudging respect. "The human tactics appear to violate fundamental principles of military science. yet they are proving remarkably effective against an enemy that had perfected conventional countermeasures. Senator Ara activated her communication pod from the Trade Federation's monitoring station. Chancellor, I've been analyzing the economic implications of the human tactics. If Earth's approach can be successfully replicated, we're looking at the shortest major conflict resolution in galactic history. The cost savings alone would be. Senator, interrupted, while economic considerations are important, I'm more interested in understanding how humans accomplished what our greatest military minds considered impossible. Director highlighted specific sections of the tactical displays. Chancellor, based on the engagement records, Earth's success appears to stem from deliberately embracing tactical unpredictability. Their forces operate without conventional coordination, using random weapon patterns and chaotic formation changes to prevent enemy adaptation. Studied the battle recordings with growing fascination. The human fleets moved like no military force he had ever observed, ships breaking formation without apparent cause, weapons firing in patterns that seemed deliberately inefficient, entire squadrons suddenly changing objectives mid-engagement. This appears to be organized chaos, he observed. That's exactly what it is, Ambassador confirmed. Earth's military doctrine recognizes that when facing a superior adaptive enemy, predictability becomes a liability. Our forces are trained to operate effectively even when standard tactical coordination breaks down. Elder's mental voice carried notes of philosophical confusion. But how do human commanders maintain effective control when their forces operate randomly? They don't, Ambassador replied simply. Earth's military philosophy emphasizes individual initiative over centralized control. Our ship commanders are trained to identify and exploit opportunities independently, without waiting for orders from higher authority. Felt his understanding of military organization fundamentally challenged. The Empire had built its military dominance on perfect coordination, disciplined formations, and centralized tactical control. The idea that abandoning such principles could lead to greater effectiveness seemed impossible. Ambassador, are you suggesting that chaos is more effective than order? I'm suggesting that rigid order becomes a weakness when facing an enemy that can predict and counter organized patterns, Ambassador explained. The hegemony's advantage came from their ability to analyze and adapt to logical tactical approaches. When tactics stop being logical, adaptation becomes impossible. Director was monitoring communications from multiple battle fronts. Chancellor, we're receiving requests for tactical coordination from 17 different star systems. The Defense Fleet wants to implement human protocols at the engagement. The Military Council is requesting immediate deployment of chaos tactics at their front. Realized that he was facing a decision that would reshape galactic military doctrine. Either embrace these unconventional human methods, or continue with traditional approaches that had proven inadequate against the hegemony threat. Director, what is your professional assessment of human tactical effectiveness? Chancellor, based on current engagement data, Earth's approaches are achieving tactical results that exceed our best-case scenario projections by orders of magnitude. However, long-term implementation across diverse species would require fundamental restructuring of military command systems. Elder projected thoughts tinged with concern. Chancellor, adopting human tactics would require our forces to abandon principles that have guided galactic military development for. The philosophical implications are staggering. Senator Ara's voice carried characteristic merchant pragmatism. Philosophical implications aside, if human tactics can end this conflict quickly, the alternative is watching the hegemony consume the galaxy systematically. Economic survival trumps philosophical comfort. Ambassador spoke from her display. Chancellor, Earth understands the magnitude of what we're proposing. We're asking the galaxy to trust methods that seem to violate everything you've learned about warfare. But the evidence speaks for itself. Conventional tactics have failed, unconventional tactics are succeeding. Turn to study the strategic map showing current hegemony positions. Just 6 hours earlier, the red markers had been advancing across dozens of systems. Now, for the first time since the conflict began, those markers were retreating. Ambassador, if Earth's tactics are implemented galaxy-wide, how quickly could we expect to see strategic results? Admiral estimates that coordinated chaos implementation could force complete hegemony withdrawal from all occupied systems within 48 to 72 hours. But only if we act immediately, before they develop adaptation protocols for unpredictable tactics. The command center fell silent as everyone processed the implications. The galaxy's greatest military crisis could be resolved in less than 3 days, but only by abandoning military principles that had been considered fundamental for thousands of years. Chancellor, called Director, we're receiving a priority transmission from Admiral aboard the Defiant. The display shifted to show Admiral on the bridge of his flagship. Behind him, could see crew members working at stations that looked barely controlled chaos, with tactical displays showing patterns that seemed completely random. Chancellor Admiral here. I know what you're thinking. What we're proposing sounds insane. But I need you to understand something about human military philosophy. Proceed, Admiral. For most of human history, we've been the smaller, weaker, less advanced force. We've never had the luxury of fighting fair fights against equally matched opponents. Every major human military victory has come from finding ways to make our opponents' advantages irrelevant. Gestured to tactical displays showing the ongoing hegemony retreat. The machine's greatest strength is their ability to adapt to logical tactics. So we stopped using logical tactics. Their perfect coordination becomes useless when they're facing deliberately uncoordinated opponents. Found himself genuinely impressed by the human admiral's clarity of thought. Admiral, you're asking us to trust that chaos can be more effective than order. Chancellor, I'm asking you to trust that when order fails, chaos might succeed. You've tried everything else. We're the only thing left. Elder's psychic voice carried notes of reluctant acceptance. The human argument has a certain philosophical merit. When perfection fails, imperfection may provide solutions that perfection cannot conceive. Senator Ara activated her communication system. Chancellor, the Trade Federation formally supports immediate implementation of human tactical protocols across all Allied fleets. The economic data supports this decision. Director looked up from her monitoring station. Chancellor, we're receiving similar recommendations from military advisors across the Allied species. The consensus is that human tactics, while unconventional, offer our best chance for rapid conflict resolution. Looked around the command center, taking in the faces of representatives from dozens of species who had all reached the same unlikely conclusion. The galaxy's best hope for survival lay in abandoning everything they thought they knew about warfare. Very well, he announced. Earth's tactical protocols are hereby approved for immediate galaxy-wide implementation. Admiral, you have full authorization to coordinate tactical operations across all Allied fleets. Understood, Chancellor. We'll begin deployment immediately. As transmission ended, Ambassador spoke from her display. Chancellor, there's one more thing. Earth's success isn't just about tactical innovation. It's about trusting our allies to adapt quickly to completely new approaches. What do you mean, Ambassador? Chancellor, implementing chaos tactics requires individual ship commanders to make independent decisions without waiting for central authority. Every species will need to train their officers to embrace uncertainty and trust their instincts over doctrine. Realize that Earth wasn't just offering new tactics. They were offering a completely different philosophy of military command. Instead of the top-down control that most species preferred, humans were suggesting that effective warfare required bottom-up initiative. Ambassador, are you saying that successful implementation requires our forces to think more like humans? I'm saying it requires your forces to think like individuals facing impossible odds who have to find their own solutions, Ambassador replied. Humans aren't special because we're chaotic. We're effective because we've learned to function when chaos is the only option available. Director interrupted with urgent news. Chancellor, we're receiving reports from the front. The ethereal fleet has successfully implemented modified chaos protocols and forced a hegemony retreat. Estimated enemy losses exceed 40%. The evidence was becoming overwhelming. Across multiple fronts, human tactics were achieving results that conventional approaches had failed to deliver. The galaxy's survival might indeed depend on learning to embrace controlled chaos. Admiral called to the communication display. How confident is Earth that these tactics will continue to prove effective? Chancellor, we estimate we have between 12 and 18 hours before the hegemony begins developing countermeasures to chaotic tactics. But if we can achieve strategic objectives within that window, the conflict could be resolved before their adaptation is complete. Made his final decision. Very well. All Allied fleets are hereby ordered to implement human chaos protocols immediately. The galaxy will either be saved by organized confusion, or we will learn definitively that some enemies cannot be defeated by any means. As communication channels opened across the galaxy to coordinate the most unconventional military operation in galactic history, couldn't help but reflect on how completely Earth had transformed the Senate's understanding of warfare in less than 48 hours. The humans had requested a seat at the galactic table, and now they were teaching everyone else how to flip that table over when necessary. Ambassador Sarah stood before the assembled Galactic Senate 36 hours after the galaxy-wide implementation of human chaos protocols. The massive chamber buzzed with excited conversations in hundreds of languages as representatives processed the most dramatic military victory in recorded galactic history. Behind her, the central display showed a strategic map that would have been impossible to believe just 2 days earlier. Every red marker representing hegemony forces was either in full retreat or completely eliminated. Chancellor called the chamber to order, his forearms moving in gestures that conveyed both amazement and respect. Distinguished representatives, we gather today to acknowledge an unprecedented military achievement. In 36 hours, Allied forces implementing Earth's tactical innovations have successfully eliminated the hegemony threat from 97% of occupied systems. A wave of astonished murmurs swept through the chamber. Even the species that had supported Earth's admission to the Senate had not expected such comprehensive success in so short a time. Ambassador, Chancellor continued, Earth's contribution to this victory has exceeded even our most optimistic projections. Perhaps you would share the final operational statistics with the Senate. Sarah activated her presentation system, displaying tactical summaries from across the galaxy. Distinguished representatives, combined Allied forces achieved a decisive victory using coordinated chaos protocols. Total hegemony casualties, 86% of their operational fleet destroyed or disabled. Allied casualties, less than 3% across all participating forces. The numbers were so dramatically different from previous engagement statistics that several representatives requested confirmation through independent sources. The verification systems, the military observers, and even the notoriously skeptical analysis teams all confirmed identical figures. Elder's psychic voice resonated with something approaching awe. Ambassador, these results suggest a fundamental transformation in the nature of warfare itself. How do human military theorists explain such comprehensive success? Sarah had prepared for this question, but the answer still felt surreal to verbalize. Elder human military doctrine has always recognized that our greatest strength lies in adapting to situations where conventional approaches fail. When facing an enemy that could counter any logical strategy, the logical response was to abandon logic altogether. Senator Aura activated her communication pod, her 3 eyes blinking in sequence as she processed the economic implications. Ambassador, preliminary trade route analysis suggests that hegemony withdrawal will restore normal commercial operations across 94% of affected systems within 60 hours. This represents the fastest economic recovery from a galactic-scale conflict in recorded history. Dr. Orr of the Scientific Union spoke from his environmental chamber. Ambassador, our analysis teams are struggling to understand how deliberately random tactics can produce consistently positive results. From a mathematical perspective, chaos should lead to chaos, not victory. Sarah smiled at the question that cut to the heart of human military philosophy. Dr. Orr, chaos isn't random, it's unpredictable. Human forces don't operate randomly, they operate unpredictably. Every action serves a purpose, but that purpose isn't apparent to external observers, including enemy adaptation systems. She highlighted specific battle recordings on the main display. For example, when Admiral Harrison's fleet appeared to retreat chaotically at Wolf 359, they were actually implementing a coordinated maneuver that drew hegemony forces into a tactical trap. The enemy's adaptation systems read the retreat as random panic, not calculated strategy. Chancellor leaned forward, his expression showing genuine intellectual curiosity. Ambassador, you're describing tactics that appear random but are actually planned. Precisely, Chancellor. Human chaos protocols use unpredictability as camouflage for conventional tactical objectives. We achieve strategic goals through means that appear strategically meaningless. Commander of the military spoke through his translation system. Ambassador, our tactical analysis suggests that human approaches require unprecedented levels of individual initiative from ship commanders. How do Earth forces maintain unit coherence when individual vessels operate with such autonomy? This was the question Sarah had hoped someone would ask, because it highlighted the fundamental difference between human and galactic military philosophy. Commander, Earth's military doctrine is built on the principle that effective leadership means preparing your people to succeed without you. Our ship commanders don't wait for orders. They identify opportunities and exploit them independently. She brought up training records showing human officers in simulated combat scenarios. Every Earth military commander trains extensively for situations where communication is impossible, chain of command is broken, and standard protocols have failed. We call it orphan protocols operating effectively when you're completely cut off from higher authority. Elder projected thoughts tinged with philosophical fascination. Ambassador, you're describing a military structure based on individual judgment rather than collective coordination. We're describing a military structure based on trust, Sarah corrected. Earth trusts our commanders to make good decisions even in impossible circumstances. That trust allows us to implement tactics that would be impossible for forces that require constant coordination. Director Aura of the Stellar Cartography Guild brought up a question that several representatives had been considering. Ambassador, given Earth's demonstrated military effectiveness, how should the galaxy restructure its defense strategies for future threats? Sarah had been dreading this question because she knew the answer would be controversial. Director, Earth believes that the galaxy's greatest strength lies in diversity of tactical approaches. Human chaos protocols work because the hegemony had never encountered anything like them. Future threats might be immune to chaos, but vulnerable to other unconventional approaches. She gestured to represent the assembled species. The galaxy contains hundreds of different military traditions and tactical philosophies. Instead of standardizing on any single approach, including Earth's, we should cultivate maximum diversity of strategic capabilities. Chancellor's expression shifted to something between surprise and approval. Ambassador, are you suggesting that Earth does not wish to export its tactical superiority across the galaxy? Chancellor, Earth recognizes that our tactical success came from being unexpected. If chaos protocols become standard galactic doctrine, they lose their effectiveness against adaptive enemies. Our greatest contribution might be encouraging every species to develop their own unconventional approaches. Senator Aura spoke again, her voice carrying merchant pragmatism. Ambassador, that's a remarkably non-expansionist philosophy for a species that just demonstrated galactic military superiority. Sarah felt the weight of her response carefully. This was the moment that would define Earth's relationship with the galactic community for generations to come. Senator, Earth didn't seek military superiority, we sought survival. Now that survival is secured, our goal is to ensure that the galaxy is prepared for whatever threats emerge next. She activated a new display showing strategic recommendations that Earth's military analysts had prepared. Human tactical analysis suggests implementing a rotating leadership structure for galactic defense. Different species would take primary responsibility for different types of threats, based on their unique capabilities and tactical traditions. For example, Sarah continued, they excel at conventional military coordination and should lead responses to traditional invasion threats. They have unmatched analytical capabilities and should coordinate responses to technological threats. The ethereals possess unique psychic abilities that could counter mental or spiritual dangers. Elder's psychic voice carried notes of surprise. Ambassador, you're proposing that Earth deliberately limit its own military authority in galactic affairs. Elder, we're proposing that Earth take responsibility for coordinating diverse capabilities rather than imposing uniform doctrine. The galaxy's survival depends on maintaining tactical unpredictability, not perfecting any single approach. Chancellor exchanged glances with several senior representatives before speaking. Ambassador, Earth's military success has earned it the right to request significant authority in galactic defense matters. Why are you declining such authority? Sarah took a deep breath before delivering the answer that embodied everything she had learned about human values during the crisis. Chancellor, Earth learned something important during this conflict. Power isn't about controlling others, it's about enabling others to succeed. We don't want to command the galaxy's defenses. We want to help every species become as effective as possible using their own unique strengths. The chamber fell into contemplative silence as representatives processed this unexpected philosophical position. Most species that achieved dramatic military superiority used that advantage to expand their political influence. Earth was voluntarily limiting its own authority in favor of collective empowerment. Director activated her communication system. Ambassador, assuming the Senate accepts Earth's strategic recommendations, what specific role would humanity prefer in future galactic defense structures? Sarah smiled as she delivered the answer that she hoped would define Earth's legacy in galactic affairs. Director, Earth requests the role of strategic. When conventional approaches fail, when established doctrine proves inadequate, when the galaxy faces threats that defy standard solutions, that's when you call humans. We want to be the species you contact when you need someone to break the rules productively. Chancellor's four arms moved in a gesture of formal acknowledgement. Ambassador, on behalf of the Galactic Senate, I formally acknowledge Earth's decisive contribution to resolving the hegemony crisis. Furthermore, the Senate accepts Earth's recommendation for diverse tactical development across member species. He paused, looking directly at Sarah with an expression of genuine respect. Ambassador, when Earth was granted Senate membership, many representatives questioned whether humanity had earned its place at this table. I believe we now have our answer. Sarah felt a surge of pride, not just for Earth's military success, but for the way her species had chosen to use that success. Chancellor, Earth is honored to serve the galactic community. We look forward to helping the galaxy prepare for whatever challenges emerge next. As the session concluded and representatives began filing out of the chamber, Sarah remained at her speaking position, watching the strategic displays that showed a galaxy finally free from hegemony occupation. Human fleets were already beginning to withdraw from forward positions, returning to defensive stances that supported other species rather than commanding them. Her communicator buzzed with a message from Admiral aboard the Defiant. Sarah, mission accomplished. Earth has proven it deserves its Senate seat, and more importantly, we've proven that humans can be trusted with the responsibility that comes with it. Sarah typed back, David, I think we've taught the galaxy something important about strength. The most powerful position isn't the one that controls everyone else, it's the one that helps everyone else become powerful. As she walked through the crystalline corridors toward the human embassy, Sarah reflected on how completely the crisis had transformed both Earth's position in the galaxy and the galaxy's understanding of military strategy. The hegemony had been defeated not through superior force or advanced technology, but through the recognition that sometimes survival requires abandoning everything you think you know about winning. The galaxy had learned that Earth deserved its Senate seat not because humans were superior to other species, but because they were willing to find unconventional solutions when conventional approaches failed. More importantly, Earth had demonstrated that true leadership meant empowering others rather than controlling them. Sarah paused at a viewing port overlooking Nexus Prime's sprawling cityscape, watching the lights of 1,000 civilizations that could now continue growing and thriving, because one species had been willing to embrace chaos in service of order. The Galactic Senate had learned why Earth deserved its seat, but perhaps more importantly, Earth had learned what it meant to be worthy of the trust that seat represented. Somewhere in the distance, human ships were already beginning the long journey home, leaving behind a galaxy that was safer, more diverse, and better prepared for whatever impossible challenges the future might bring. It had been a very good day for both humanity and the galaxy as a whole. Had a feeling that the galaxy was about to receive a very comprehensive education in human military philosophy. Whether that education would save civilization or destroy, it remained to be seen. The feeling that they were either about to make military history or become a cautionary tale about the dangers of abandoning proven tactics. Either way, The galaxy was about to learn something new about humanity in human hands. Sarah activated her secure communicator one more time, sending a priority message to Earth's High Command. Authorization granted for full intelligence access. Operation is authorized. God help us all.